Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Elizabeth Lochner-Abel of Walworth is a Democratic candidate in the 31st Assembly District. Elizabeth, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you so much for having me on, Steve.
Well, as I go through your social media on your campaign, you make 3 points, and I'm going to ask you to elaborate on, and that is that the clean air, world-class education, tradition of supporting workers that you had seen and grown up with in Wisconsin have been eviscerated. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, when I talk about that, the things that I look at are the legacy that we've always had in Wisconsin, and something that I think every American citizen prizes is having clean air and clean water, having high quality education, and being able to support our workers. And I think Wisconsin was always a standard bearer for that. It's why so many people moved to this state. It's why I stayed in this state. After I graduated from college, I chose to spend my career here in Wisconsin. And I've just seen in the last 10 years or so a decline in those things that we value. We're passing legislation that is degrading our environmental protections in so many ways. We're not paying attention to things that are affecting our groundwater and our drinking water, and we're seeing more and more issues with that as time goes on. I also feel that there's been a constant attack on public education, pre-K through 16 in this state. We don't value that as much as we used to. We are getting away from the Wisconsin idea, and that's very disturbing to me. I know many people who moved to Wisconsin because they loved the public school system and what it had to offer. And our world-class university system is the envy of other states. And to constantly see that erosion is very distressing for me as an educator. And I also am upset with the attack on our workers. Act 10 started the ball rolling on constantly attacking people who just want to make an honest living and be treated fairly at their jobs. Nobody wants a handout. They want to be able to have a good life. And the constant attack that has come after Act 10 on workers in Wisconsin just is a shame from where our legacy was under Fightin' Bob LaFollette.
Thank you. Thank you for the overview. This week, the governor asked that lawmakers be in session on his 9 bills on policing reforms. Have you had a chance to review those? Are those bills that, if you were in the legislature, you could vote for?
I haven't had a chance to review the bill in its entirety. I do know that it was setting up reforms for to protect the police in their jobs, as well as change how we view our police department and what their role is in our communities. So I don't know all of the bills that are in there, but I do know that the bills are both Democrat and Republican bills. It's a bipartisan 9-bill package that is putting the safety of our officers foremost, and in addition, answering the reforms that this state is crying out for.
Okay, so you do see some need for some policing updates and reforms then, correct?
I do. I think some cities individually and communities individually have started the reforms. I know police officers and have talked with them who say that some of the reforms that are in this package and that people have putting forward saying we need to do this, we need police to do that, they do that already. We have communities cities that have the mandatory camera for the police officers, which protects the police officers as much as it protects the citizens, and that isn't a statewide mandate and funded statewide is something that really needs to be addressed.
Okay, unfortunately, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Let's a few questions about that. So,
Yes.
State Senate Republicans would like to come in and overturn and rescind the governor's mandatory mask edict. Do you have a position on the mandatory mask rule or order?
I listen to our public health officials and doctors and what the experts have to say, and they've clearly indicated that if we all wear masks and we all do our part, that we can drive the virus out of Wisconsin as well as out of our country and get back to life as normal, if you want to call it that. And it's just a shame that something as simple as this and as backed by science that it is, that this has become such a partisan issue that it's dividing our state.
Okay. There was a report Monday that state tax collections held up for the year that ended June 30. Everybody's worried about the current year we're in because of the pandemic and tax collections. If we were $1 billion or $1.5 billion short, your reaction, would you want to cut spending or raise taxes and fees?
I know with the new revenue estimates that came out, it suggests that our revenues are higher than originally anticipated. And so we don't have the $2 billion shortfall that Evers projected earlier. And that being said, we can, if we have a shortfall, we can raise revenues through different methods. One of them could be using the rainy day fund, which is in excess of $761 million. We also need to take the Medicaid expansion, which will put a couple $100 million annually in our state budget. We just can't expect people, the citizens of Wisconsin, to bear this additional burden of having this shortfall. If I am elected, I would look at other ways to raise revenues. We can be creative with this. We have to look at different things that the state can do. And I really couldn't say, what cuts I would make or things like that until I looked at the budget and saw where the shortfalls were and saw what we have to work with in that situation as to whether or not we can cut spending.
Hospitals nationally and of course in Wisconsin have played a key role in treating COVID-19 patients. If you're elected to the legislature and voting on the next state budget, do you think hospitals deserve an even greater priority than they might have in the current budget?
Yes, I do. I think that we need to support our hospitals, especially in rural areas. They've been very hard hit by this. We could have done this easily by taking the Medicaid expansion, like 30 plus other states, both Democrat and Republican states in this country, have already accepted that money. And we should just simply join them because that will put money in our hospitals to help them cope with treating the pandemic. There's just no excuse that in the middle of a pandemic, we are not providing for our hospitals, and that this issue, like so many issues in Madison, but this one has become such a hyper-partisan issue that it's stuck in the mud. And instead of action, Madison is doing nothing, and Wisconsinites are the ones who are suffering for it.
This week, State Senator Kappinga introduced a bill that said if a business or an organization has complied with CWC COVID rules to protect its employers and customers, they should be exempt from COVID lawsuits. Do we need a law like that?
It's kind of a yes and no situation. Do we need a law for kind of common sense things? But yeah, I believe that, we've got safeguards in place. If, like you said, the business is doing everything it can to protect its workers and its customers during the pandemic, then they should have peace of mind that they're not going to be sued when they're already facing economic hardships. However, if a business is not following the safe guidelines that are set up and not protecting its workers or any of its customers, then they need to be held accountable.
Okay. What's your position on both medical and recreational marijuana?
I think we need to look seriously at this issue. I think it keeps getting pushed off. And I live on the state line, right across the border in Illinois. They have made marijuana legal, and people from Wisconsin are flocking down to Illinois to purchase marijuana products, and we're losing revenue that way, taxable revenue. I know that medicinal marijuana will really help so many people who are dealing with medical issues that create great pain, helping our veterans with their challenges they face with their mental health as well as their physical health. And I think it's time to look at marijuana as a drug and regulate it as we do other drugs.
The state constitution says that the next boundaries for congressional and legislative districts should be drawn by the party in control in the Capitol. But Governor Evers has proposed a People's Maps Commission that would submit a map to the legislature to be enacted. What's your position on redistricting?
This is one area my opponent and I disagree on greatly. I think the people in Assembly District 31 should pick their leader. The leader shouldn't pick the voters. And I agree that we need a commission, an independent commission, to work with the redistricting and fix our problem that we have here in Wisconsin. What we have now has just led to such partisanship games and showmanship that we are not getting our state to heal. It's creating a greater divide between our citizens, and it's really hurting Wisconsin. And I agree that we should follow something similar to the Iowa model. It works, it's fair, and that's what we need.
Let's talk about property taxes, because Wisconsin is a high property tax state. For more than 2 decades, school districts and local governments have had to live with property tax caps and limits to control property taxes. If you're elected and voting on the next state budget, would you vote to continue those caps and limits on property taxes on local governments?
I don't want to place any more financial burden on people. Frankly, I don't want to pay any more in property taxes that I'm already paying. Mine are high also. But our school systems are drastically underfunded. And to shortchange our students is setting our state up for failure. Education has the power to transform our state. And our current funding formula and the caps and levies it just creates inequity in our school systems. And every student in this state should have access to a high quality education, no matter what their zip code is. And our current funding formula creates huge inequities. So we need to adopt a fair funding proposal. There's one been floated around for quite a couple of years now, and we need a proposal that is fair. It's sustainable and it's transparent, and it will strengthen our rural schools especially, and also our schools that are seeing a declining enrollment, because they are affected greatly by our current formula also. And I think that a proposal such as the one that's been promoted is amenable to the ideals of both parties. But to just keep capping the levies and the tax caps and the spending limits is only hurting the future of our state, and that's our kids.
To reduce the reliance on property taxes, should local governments have other revenue options? Milwaukee wants to levy, for example, its own half-cent sales tax. Do local governments, to reduce reliance on property tax, need revenue options?
I think so. I think this is a conversation that needs to be community driven. And I think the state needs to get out of the way and give local communities the ability to fund themselves as to a way that suits their community. They know best what their community needs and what levies or revenues and things that their citizens can support and handle. Our communities know best for that, and the state just needs to allow them the opportunity to do that. If a community wants a local tax, they should have the ability to vote on that local tax.
Okay. Last year, Governor Evers recommended raising the gas tax to stabilize how we pay for highways and bridges. The gas tax is 30.9 cents, hasn't been raised in 10 or 12 years. Could you support a gas tax increase, Elizabeth?
I do, but there's caveats with that.
Okay.
Like you said, we haven't had a gas tax hike in years. It has not kept up with the rate of inflation. And repealing the gas tax indexing in 2005 was a mistake. Right now, Wisconsinites are bearing the burden of funding our crumbling infrastructure, our bridges and roads, through the increase in licensings and fees. And we need to put the onus on everyone who drives in and through our state. And that's what a it's hard to say, gas tax indexing will do. Our leaders have gutted the transportation budget, and now we're paying for it. Wisconsin wants to become a high-tech state. We're on our way to being a high-tech state, and we have to have an infrastructure that supports that. Our bridges and roads need to be repaired in our rural areas so that our farmers can get their crops harvested and to the processing and shipping. Right now, they're driving on just terrible roads. It's hurting our farmers that way. It's hurting our small businesses. It's hurting commerce throughout the state. And in addition to, our infrastructure of roads and bridges crumbling, we have the issue with broadband. 20 minutes before this interview, my internet went down and I had no internet access at my house, and my neighbor didn't have any, and I ended up running down to the church 2 blocks away. Thank God I live in a small town, and they were gracious enough to allow me to log into their internet so that I could do this interview. So we need to look at all of these things, and having our gas tax keep up with inflation is just a given.
Well, thanks to your church, I'm glad for letting you do the interview. Just a couple more questions. If a school district or a local government plans a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses? The reason I ask is a study found in 2015, out-of-state contractors for public works projects got projects totaling $72 million, but that more than doubled to $146 million in 2018. Should local governments have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
Absolutely. When we invest in our local businesses and companies, we are investing in our communities. And in a rural area like where I live and where my district is, that is just a huge dividend for the community. Our local tax dollars should be used to support people who work in the state. I can't believe that this is an issue. It's like so many things in Madison right now. It benefits Wisconsinites, and it's become a partisan issue and a back burner issue, and that's not where it should be. We should be supporting our businesses.
Final question. We have about a minute left. Can you summarize differences? Do you want to summarize differences between you and your opponent on November 3?
Well, it's pretty stark. I'm not a politician. I'm a former teacher, although I still call myself a teacher. But I'm just like many Wisconsinites out there who are tired of the way things are going in Madison. Issue after issue just gets mired down and goes nowhere. We have so much partisan back and forth that it does nothing for the state. And it's hurting our small business owners. It's hurting our teachers. It's hurting our farmers. And it's just hurting the senior citizens even in this state. Everyone is affected by this. And everybody's just working hard and wants to have a better life. And that's all they're asking for. They aren't asking for any great handouts. And we just want to have a good life. And I think that my opponent represents everything that we see wrong in Madison. She talks about being bipartisan. She talks about working across the aisle, but that doesn't happen when she gets to Madison, and she's hoping we don't notice that. I firmly believe she has lost her voice in the past 10 years that she has been in Madison, and it's time for a new voice, and that would be me, because sometimes I have a pretty big voice. I also firmly believe that I may only win this election by 50.5% of the vote, but I represent 100% of the voters, not just the people who vote for me. I will represent everyone in AD 31.
Thank you. Elizabeth Lochner-Abel is of Walworth, is a Democratic candidate running in the 31st Assembly District. The election is November 3. Elizabeth, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was exciting.
I'm glad you were able to find a internet connection. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.